let's look at some techniques that are helpful when we're working with AI planning and code interpreter. These techniques can help save you a bunch of time and headache when you're trying to figure out why it's just not doing what you want it to do, or where the process is going off the rails. So I'm going to work on this example where I'm taking a transcript of one of the videos and I'm trying to turn it into a blog post and social media post. Now, the reason why this is an interesting problem to work on is we want to create something that's longer and bigger, and we're going to try to get Code Interpreter to incrementally build all the different pieces we need for our blog post. If you tried to get Code Interpreter write 10 to 15 paragraphs, just all in one go, it's probably going to be kind of hard. And so part of what we're going to be doing is we're going to try to break the problem down, subdivide it into a series of individual steps, have Code Interpreter go and work on each individual step in its plan, and then bring all the pieces back together. And anytime you're working on bigger and bigger outputs that you're trying to get, you're inherently going to be limited by how much Code Interpreter or ChatGPT or whatever you want to working with, whatever tool you're working with, there's always going to be some limit to the amount of output it'll give you at once. So when you're working with problems, a lot of times you'll use AI planning to break the problem down into a series of steps, and then you'll execute each step individually to produce some piece of the final result that you'll want, and then you'll go and tie all those results back together into one cohesive file or thing that you can start editing as the human. So what I'm going to say is this is the transcript from a video that I just recorded. Can you create a step-by-step process for taking the transcription and rewriting it as a blog post and a series of social media posts? We're only going to look at the blog post piece for this, but I went ahead and put it all in there. How do we turn this into how do we turn this conversational discussion into one that has clear paragraphs with topic sentences and supporting discussion? I want the blog post to be 10 to 15 paragraphs. No doubt this would be harder to get if we were just doing it. I could have done 30 paragraphs. I could have done 100 paragraphs. 10 to 15 takes long enough, so I'm going to stop there. And then I describe some initial things, and then I say create separate plans for blog posts and social media posts. So sometimes this is a helpful thing to notice. If you have different pieces of the problem, or if you're trying to solve for multiple goals at once, have it do things and break them apart into separate plans that can be executed so you can refer to them individually or save them individually. So it goes through and it says, here are the step-by-step plans for turning your video transcript into a blog post and a series of social media posts. And we get the plan for the blog post and we get the plan for the social media post. And notice we've basically split it and we've said create two separate plans. So although we're asking it to do planning, at the same time we're saying build separate plans. And this is useful when we want to be able to work with them individually, which we're going to do in this case. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to one of the individual plans, and I'm going to show you a technique that's helpful, which is we want to adapt the plan for the content that we're actually working with. So I know that it's got this generic plan, and if we look at the plan, it's going to have very high level sort of things that aren't specific to the content. And it may be able to go and read the content and the actual thing that it's going to work on and get a better plan. So what I'm going to ask it to do is I'm going to ask it to refine its plan based on the actual content that it's going to be working with in the plan. Because sometimes knowing what that content is can help you inform like what gets done, what are the individual steps, what's important and what's not. And so based on that, what it does is it goes and reads the first 500 characters of the transcript, which this is actually a flaw. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but I should have had it go through the entire thing. I should have made sure it went through the entire set of content before trying to do this. And this was actually a mistake on my part. Always try to make sure it gets as much context as possible. Then it rewrites the plan. It says, here's what I'm going to do. And it defines a concrete plan that is based on the content. So before it didn't say anything about what was in the content, and now it's saying, okay, my specific plan is I'm going to define the structure, and it's describing exactly what is going to be the structure of the blog post down to paragraphs. It's saying it's briefly introducing the topic, which is the differentiation between Code Interpreter and ChatGPT. It's going to explain what ChatGPT is. It's going to introduce Code Interpreter, and it's going to describe the additional features that Code Interpreter wraps around ChatGPT, provide examples or use cases, and then recap. And notice it's gotten the plan down, the structure down to a series of paragraphs. This is much more actionable than the high-level plan. Then says I'm going to draft topic sentences for each paragraph. It's going to expand on the topic sentences, write an introduction and conclusion, review and edit, add headers, subheaders. Now notice what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop back into actually just telling it something to do. I'm not going to say on your plan. I'm just going to say remove step 8. I don't care about that. This is one of the nice things. When you have it generate the plan, you can also go and tell it toss out things that I don't care about. So I'm saying remove step 8. It goes and refines its plan. But notice again, we started with this very generic plan of the blog post plan. We had 2 plans. I'm now just telling it I want to just work with the blog post plan. And I told it to take my content and refine its plan based on the actual content. And then I told it to toss out one of the steps, so I'm editing the plan to remove things before it executes it. And then I said, save the plan to a text file so I can recall it later. This can be a useful thing. One, because if you ever want to use this plan again, if its plan works really well, was really well designed, you don't want to have to be copying and paste it necessarily. You can just go and have it in a text file. So I ask it to do that, and I now have access to it. Now I'm going to tell it, execute the plan step by step and save the result of each step in a separate file. At the start of each step, read the result of the last step and reflect to make sure the next step aligns with the result of the prior step. Now there's a couple things I'm doing here that I want to talk about because they can be really useful. One is I'm telling it to save the result of each step in a separate file. This can be really useful to you if you want the individual pieces, if you want to be able to download them as it's accomplishing the task and you don't want to wait till the very end. It can also be really useful if something happens. You don't want to lose all the work from the individual steps. It can be useful if you, as you'll see at the end, want to go and build something that's probably bigger than you can get in one output from ChatGPT or from Code Interpreter. This way you can have it build everything incrementally in different files and then put everything back together in one thing. The other thing that's really useful is if you're trying to figure out why is it going off the rails, you can just click on one of those files and you can look at it and say, oh, it's completely missed the point here. And you can know where in the process, where in its plan, it sort of missed what you're trying to get at, where it's misunderstanding. Now, the second piece of this that's important is I'm saying at the start of each step, read the result of the last step and reflect to make sure the step aligns with the result of the prior. So what I'm telling it is, at the beginning of each step that you're taking, don't just go off and do it independently, but think through what you did in the last step and make sure that you account for that. And if something happened in the last step that maybe requires you to adapt the plan slightly, go and account for that. So you can think about this as just being very cognizant of, if there's something in the output of the last step that we need to know about, make sure and take into account that thing. And so you're telling it, just look at the output, look at what happened in the last step, and use it in the next step. Now this is also can be important if you want to make sure things are cohesive, because it may go off and just do each step totally independently, and that may not always be what you want, particularly if you were writing a blog post and you want to make sure the sentences and topics are cohesive. So now it goes through and it starts working on the plan, and you notice like all these here links that I can download where it's basically executing the plan and giving me links to download the individual pieces. So that's really helpful to me, and it's going and executing the plan. It writes the introduction, it writes the first paragraph, and then it stops. And it says, please note this is a time-consuming process and involves all this other stuff, blah, blah, blah. But this is one thing that you are absolutely going to see for a longer plan, particularly one where you're trying to generate more content than can typically be done in one time if you entered in a chat message. That is, it's going to get to some limit and it's going to stop. And you see, we got it to do a lot of steps, but it didn't execute the entire plan. And so one of your jobs as the human interacting with the tool is always going to be to look at and identify when it's hitting a limit and stopping its output, and then coaxing it to continue on. Now, sometimes you're going to see that it's going to take something like the topic sentences and try to just generate 1 or 2 paragraphs, or do some smaller version of it to get it to fit in its response and its limits that it has. And sometimes you have to tell it, no, go into each of those individual items and do this step by step separately. Because what we really want to do is get all the pieces generated into individual files so we can always go put them back together. You can think of this as like it's writing a paper a paragraph at a time, but we have to output each paragraph to a separate file, and at the end we'll just tell it combine all the files together so it doesn't get stuck. So I'm going to say, please proceed executing the plan for each topic sentence. So notice I'm being the conductor here. I'm telling it, okay, go back and continue the process, but I want you to run the process for each of the topic sentences that you wrote. And now it goes and starts executing the plan again, giving me the paragraphs in separate files that I could go and individually download if I wanted to see what's happening. I could also look at these incrementally and see, do they look like paragraphs that I really want, or has it gone off the rails? And I could stop it at any point. This is always useful. And so it goes through writing all of the paragraphs. It gets to the 11th paragraph. Again, it hits a limit on how much it can do at once. And so I have to tell it to go ahead and proceed. Proceed is a great word whenever you need it to keep going in its plan. It then keeps working. It keeps writing the individual paragraphs. It goes through editing some of them. And notice it stopped. It only did the introduction, first paragraph and second paragraph, and then it wanted to stop with its editing. Now I could have coaxed it back into doing the rest of the editing. It did the same thing for the headers. It only did the headers for the first 3, the introduction, first and second paragraph. I could have coaxed it to go and do headers for each paragraph. Read and revise and edit each paragraph. I'm not doing that in this case, but I could have done that. And that's one of the things you're going to have to do as a conductor, is recognize when it skipped over things in the interest of trying to compress it into one response. And then at the end, this is really important. I had it build all these individual pieces all in separate files. I could absolutely go and download them myself and manually combine all of them, but I'm just going to tell it, please combine the 12 paragraphs and conclusion into a single file, and then it does that, and I can download that here. So we could also have gone through and said, zip up all of the files, create a zip file of all the individual files and let me download them. That's another thing that you can do to get the output. But I want to just return and go back through this thing really quickly, some of the things that we did in this to make this successful. 1, we built plans, but we also separated plans. We built separate plans. Now, we did a lot in this conversation. If I hadn't separated the plan, the social media plan may be forgotten, lost, may not be easy to use. I've got a separate blog post plan, a separate social media plan. So I've got 2 separate plans to accomplish my overall goal. I then ask it to take one of its plans, the blog post plan, and I have it refine its plan based on the content that I'm actually going to work with. So I'm taking the high level sort of generic plan and I'm telling it to refine it based on the content. This is a really helpful thing that you can do, particularly with writing. And the result of that is that we get a plan that's much more structured and specific to the content that I'm going to be working with. In this case, it won't always work out like this, but in this case, I actually, part of what I got as the output of the plan is individual paragraphs that are going to be written. And this is really helpful because this is going to be very actionable for it. I went through and I edited the plan. I removed steps that I didn't want. No point in keeping anything in that plan that you don't absolutely need. It then refines its plan, and then I told it to save its plan. Super important, super helpful. If you get a great plan, don't throw it away, refine it, or and then save it somewhere so that if something happens, you can always start with that plan. You at least can pick up from there. I could have also done that for the generic blog post plan at the very beginning and then started from that. I could have always saved it and then started a conversation by saying, here's the plan. Now I could upload the content and say, refine the plan based on the content, and then start this process, rather than having to regenerate the plan from scratch. Next, I tell it to execute the plan step by step. Again, this is important. We're going to say execute the plan step by step. We're telling it what to do, and we always want to make it step by step, typically. And very importantly, save the result of each step in a separate file. This is going to save you so much headache many times. Sometimes you'll get it to go through a great, complete plan and process, do everything perfectly. You don't have to worry about this. In my experience, this is a really useful thing and sort of a safety net for you. You want to get the output of each step and be able to access it if you need to. And then I tell it at the start of each step, look at what you did before, read the result of the last step, and reflect on it to think about what you're doing and how it aligns with what you did before. It then goes through and executes the plan. And then very importantly, we're going to need to be the conductor. We're going to need to recognize when it's hitting limits and it's stopping execution of its plan, and we're going to need to tell it to proceed, or we're going to need to give it a little bit of extra instruction, like proceed with the plan, but proceed with the plan on each individual topic sentence. Don't just do the first two. Go to each individual topic sentence and do it step by step, whatever it is. And then finally, typically what we're going to do when we're trying to build something that's larger that can be built in a single output, we could go and copy and paste from these things. But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to say, at the end, take all the individual files of all the individual pieces that we want, or we may be able to pick and choose pieces at the end and put them together in our final product, the final thing that we're creating. So this is an example of AI planning all the way down to the end to create this blog post with all these sentences and some different techniques that you can use to make sure the AI planning is effective, is doing the right thing as it goes, and can help you build larger things than can be built typically if you're not sort of saving incrementally and building individual pieces that then are stitched back together into the whole.